The Supreme Court on Tuesday rejected an appeal from Apache Stronghold, a grassroots organization which includes members of the San Carlos Apache tribe, to halt a copper mining project on federal land.
Let me tell you, the basic problem is that when tribes are trying to protect their religious rights or their ceremonial use of lands that are not within their reservation, that is, they don't own the area.
They have a spirit just like we do, but they're disregarded as resources.
But the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit ruled Congress was permitted to transfer the land.
Breaking. A Supreme Court ruling just shook the foundations of religious freedom. The sacred land of the Apache, Oak Flat, is about to be handed to a mining company. Justice Gorsuch called this a grave mistake. But the big question is, does this set a precedent where faith is only protected when it's convenient? Wait until you hear what this could mean for every sacred site in the country. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now back to the video. What if the place where your ancestors sang their prayers into the wind and found meaning in the land was at risk of becoming, wait for it, a giant pit courtesy of corporate greed? That's exactly what's happening at Oak Flat, a sacred area for the Apache people. This isn't just some plot of dirt we're talking about. This is land where rituals have been carried out for centuries, where every tree, rock, and breeze has a deep spiritual connection. To the Apache, Oak Flat holds the same kind of sanctity that any worshiper might feel stepping into a cathedral or temple. Can you imagine attending Sunday Mass and realizing the altar might as well double as a drill site? Oak Flat has always been more than just geography. In Apache tradition, it's a holy ground, a place deeply tied to ceremonies like the sunrise dance, which celebrates and protects young women as they come of age. Think of it like a communion with the earth. The US government officially recognized its importance nearly a century ago by granting it protective status. And yet, in 2014, something unbelievable happened. The government decided to trade Oak Flat to a mining company. You heard that right. A sacred site, steeped in cultural and spiritual significance, was essentially swapped for what's underneath it. Copper. You can't make this stuff up. Here's how they pulled it off, because of course it's never straightforward. Back in 2014, Arizona Senator John McCain and others snuck a rider into a must-pass defense bill. A rider, in case you're lucky enough not to follow the sausage making of politics, is basically a sneaky attachment to a bill that has nothing to do with the original purpose of that bill. So what does national defense have to do with handing off holy ground to a foreign-owned mining company? Absolutely nothing. But hey, if it wasn't shady, would it even be politics? This backdoor deal handed the land over to Resolution Copper, an Australian-British company, to create one of the largest copper mines in the world. And let's talk about what that's gonna look like. We're not talking some small, hidden operation underground. No, they're planning to use a technique called block caving, which basically collapses the land from deep below. Once they're done, a crater roughly 2 miles long and over 1,000 feet deep. So this isn't mining, it's erasure. Now, let's put this into perspective. Imagine someone bulldozing the Vatican to make a parking lot, or flattening Jerusalem's western wall to pave over it. The outrage would be unimaginable. But here, the government is banking on the fact that most people won't care, or worse, won't even notice, because it's about native land. It's like a bad episode of Who's Getting Screwed Over Now? And spoiler alert, it's always indigenous people. Under current US law, sacred sites generally don't get the level of protection they actually need. Sure, there are laws like the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, which on paper sound like they'd stop something like this, but in practice, good luck. These laws usually include loopholes big enough to drive mining trucks through. You'd expect those laws to protect Oak Flat, but apparently if there's enough money on the table, none of that really matters. And this is where it gets interesting. The courts could have stepped in to stop this, but they didn't. That's what makes the Apache Stronghold case so unique and heartbreaking. Apache Stronghold, a grassroots tribal group, sued to stop the land transfer, arguing that mining will destroy their ability to practice their religion. Without Oak Flat, their connection to their spirituality gets severed. This isn't just hypothetical harm, it's an obliteration of cultural identity. The group took the case all the way to the Supreme Court, but the justices refused to hear it, not even a footnote. They basically shrugged and moved along. And that's what takes us to the chilling underlying message behind all of this. The courts just told us, loud and clear, that sacred land isn't sacred enough if it conflicts with corporate interests. This isn't about weighing economic benefits against spiritual values. This is a straight-up auction where the highest bidder wins, no matter the consequences. Today it's Oak Flat, tomorrow, who knows? This isn't just about a patch of land in Arizona. It's about a larger pattern of how America treats indigenous rights. Spoiler alert, poorly. Every sacred site, from Standing Rock to Chaco Canyon, becomes a cautionary tale of what happens when money and exploitation get prioritized over cultural heritage. It's not just native traditions at stake here. It's a deeper betrayal of what the Constitution claims to stand for. Freedom of religion. If a sacred area can be sold off like real estate, then what protection does anyone really have? And not everyone on the Supreme Court was on board with this decision. Here's the twist. Two conservative justices, Neil Gorsuch and Clarence Thomas, dissented. And if you're thinking, wait, Gorsuch? Stay tuned, because his reasons will surprise you in ways that might just restore a shred of faith in the system. What would it take for a Supreme Court justice to call their own court's decision a grave mistake? Well, Justice Neil Gorsuch didn't hold back. Joined by Clarence Thomas, yes, you heard that right, he called out the Supreme Court's refusal to review the Oak Flat case, warning that it ignored the Apache people's religious rights and could set a precedent no one really wants to think about. Now, let that sink in. These are two justices not exactly known for throwing around dramatic language. Yet here they are, likening the situation to an act of negligence so startling that it borders on malpractice. Let's unpack this. Gorsuch's dissent wasn't just a casual disagreement, it was nothing short of an indictment of the whole situation. He argued that the lower court's decision, which let the land transfer move along like it was just a typical real estate deal, was built on shaky legal ground. More specifically, he accused the Ninth Circuit of relying on a legal framework that's, in his words, highly doubtful as a matter of law. Essentially, Gorsuch was saying that the foundation of this ruling wasn't just wrong, it was potentially disastrous. It wasn't simply a matter of differing interpretations. This crossed into the realm of dangerous precedent setting, and Gorsuch wanted no part of it. Here's the thing about Oak Flat. It's a sacred site that's central to the Apache people's religious practices. Gorsuch argued that ignoring its significance would make about as much sense as tearing down St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York for a condo complex. That's not a direct quote, of course, but that's the spirit. In his dissent, Gorsuch essentially asked, would we allow the demolition of a church, synagogue, or mosque under the same circumstances? Would the court shrug their shoulders if it were something more, let's just say, mainstream? The sheer absurdity of it makes the situation at Oak Flat all the more infuriating, and Gorsuch's point was crystal clear. Religious freedom should be universal. It doesn't stop being important just because the land in question happens to sit on a lucrative copper deposit. Now, if you're a bit surprised by Gorsuch taking this stance, let's add a little context. He's one of the more conservative justices on the bench, sure, but he also has a track record of supporting Native American rights. It's a part of his judicial philosophy that doesn't always get the same spotlight. He's written in favor of tribal sovereignty in several rulings, which makes his dissent here not just logical, but consistent. For him, this isn't just about religion, it's about standing up for a legal standard that protects everyone equally, whether their faith involves cathedrals or a sunrise dance at Oak Flat. And in this case, he made it painfully clear the Apache aren't getting that equality. The First Amendment guarantees religious freedom in America, right? We say it's one of our most cherished principles, yet here comes a mining company with a plan to rip through a site the Apache have considered holy for centuries, and the courts won't get involved. That's the heart of Gorsuch's frustration. He basically sounded the alarm, pointing out that if we're okay with stomping on the Apache's rights here, whose freedom will be treated as inconvenient next? If faith only matters when it doesn't come with corporate interference, is it really freedom at all? And here's where things get even trickier. Cases like this aren't new. The courts have had their fair share of chances to back native religious rights. Past rulings, like those tied to the Religious Freedom Restoration Act or broader interpretations of the First Amendment, have shown that protecting sacred lands is possible, but only if the courts care enough to act. Gorsuch's dissent underscores the fact that this wasn't just some open and shut issue. The Supreme Court could have stepped in. They could have addressed a blatant violation of religious rights, yet they chose not to, and by doing so, they're essentially telling indigenous communities that their faith occupies the bottom rung of the ladder. So why does this matter beyond Oak Flat? Gorsuch's dissent doesn't just criticize this one ruling, it warns about the ripple effects. If the court won't stand up for these rights here, what's stopping the government from targeting other sacred sites next? Bears Ears, Standing Rock. What happens to them if this precedent sticks? Gorsuch and Thomas's dissent signals something important. There are cracks forming in the way the courts handle native rights, and those cracks could widen. This decision might seem isolated, but its implications are anything but. And let's not pretend this is a one-sided issue. Gorsuch's position forces us all to look at larger questions. If we claim to value religious freedom in America, why does it only seem to apply when there's no financial interest involved? Should corporations really have a bigger say than centuries of tradition, cultural heritage, and the spiritual lives of an entire people? Think about it. The same legal system that claims to protect freedom of worship just greenlit the literal destruction of a people's holy ground. Let Gorsuch's analogy about demolishing a cathedral rest in your mind for a moment, because he wasn't exaggerating. If we don't take a stand when it's inconvenient, do these freedoms even mean anything? Gorsuch's dissent is more than just a disagreement. It's a wake-up call. He's not just speaking to his colleagues on the bench, but to the entire system that let this happen. It's a red flag, warning that the values we hold up as sacred are being steamrolled by profit and influence. And with no intervention from the highest court in the land, the big question now is, what comes next? Because if Oak Flat's fate tells us anything, it's that sacredness might just have an expiration date and a price tag. So what does that mean for the other sites, the other communities that might be next in line? If the Supreme Court won't protect sacred land like Oak Flat, what's stopping other sacred sites from being sold off next? That's the million-dollar question. Or maybe the billion-dollar one if you're talking mining profits. With this decision, or rather their refusal to make one, the Supreme Court has left the door wide open. Open for what exactly? For more ancestral lands to be passed around like someone flipping properties on a spreadsheet. And let's be real, this ruling is less an isolated incident and more like writing a for sale sign across the map. Take Bears Ears National Monument in Utah as one example. Bears Ears isn't just beautiful red rock canyons or natural landscapes that make for stunning Instagram posts, though it is all of that. Beyond the surface, it's a site sacred to multiple tribes, the Navajo, Hopi, Zuni, and Ute, to name a few. Yet despite its designation as a protected national monument, Bears Ears has been the subject of endless political tug of war. Back in 2017, it saw its protected area slashed by 85% under the Trump administration. Why? Oil, gas, and other resources were more important than the cultural and spiritual value of the land. And if Oak Flat teaches us anything, it's that this shrinking protection isn't just a thing of the past, it's a blueprint for what's next. There's also Standing Rock, which a lot of people remember because the protests made national headlines a few years back. The Standing Rock Sioux tribe took on the massive Dakota Access Pipeline project. That pipeline didn't just threaten their drinking water, it also ran through sites the tribe considered sacred. Imagine logging onto Twitter one day and seeing a major corporation announcing plans to drill through your family's burial grounds. Sounds insane, right? Now, to be fair, Standing Rock drew support from environmental activists and allies all over the world. But the courts? The courts weren't exactly on the tribe's side. Legal protections fell short just like they did in the Oak Flat case, and the pipeline went ahead despite the protests. So when the courts echo this kind of reasoning, it's not just about one mine or one site. It reflects an erosion of protections across the board. Native communities already face steep uphill battles when they have to take their cases to court. Most legal decisions are stacked against them from the start, especially when competing against billion-dollar business interests. And the scary reality, the Oak Flat ruling will only embolden these corporations and government agencies. Why wouldn't it? They've just been handed a legal precedent that says, keep going. Sacred doesn't mean untouchable. And this trend isn't just about land, it's really about power, who holds it and who gets left out. Oak Flat's story highlights how marginalized communities often get the short end of the stick when the rules are interpreted in ways that mostly benefit industry and wealth. And here's the kicker, when protections erode for one group, it weakens the foundation for everyone. If indigenous sacred sites aren't worth preserving because they interfere with mining or pipelines, what other forms of religious or cultural heritage are at risk of disappearing the next time something more profitable comes along? The situation at Oak Flat is a cautionary tale, but it's not just about the destruction of a single site. It's about a bigger question. What does it mean when sacred is treated as negotiable, when faith has to take a back seat to corporate profits? Native lands have always been first in the firing line, but this ruling feels like a green light to expand that line even further. So if a sacred site can be sold off this easily, what does that say about the value of faith in America today? The Supreme Court's choice to sidestep the Apache stronghold case isn't just a legal footnote, it's a glaring message about whose rights really matter. For the Apache, Oak Flat isn't just land, it's a foundation for their culture and religion. But apparently, when a billion-dollar mining deal comes along, sacred turns into negotiable. If anything, this moment shows how fragile protections for native sacred sites really are. Now, here's where you come in, educate yourself on these sites and support groups working to preserve them. Because if faith gets ignored when it's inconvenient, whose religious freedoms are truly safe?